It started as a joke. A satire account, with a name that sounds almost silly, the Cockroach Party. But by the summer of 2026, that joke had turned into tear gas in the streets of Delhi, an old man refusing to eat for 3 weeks.
नमस्कार साथियों, मैं अभी भी जिंदा ही हूँ.
And tens of thousands of students marching toward the gates of India's parliament. This is the story of how a meme became a movement, and how a broken exam system turned into a national reckoning. To understand what happened at Jantar Mantar, you first have to understand one exam, NEET. NEET stands for the National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test. It's the single exam that decides which Indian students get to become doctors. Every year, millions of teenagers, many from small towns, many the first in their families to even dream of medical school, spend years of their lives preparing for this one test. For them, it isn't just an exam. It's the difference between one future and another entirely. In 2026, something went wrong. Reports emerged of a leaked question paper, meaning some students may have had access to the exam questions before the test even began. For a system built entirely on the idea of fairness, this was catastrophic. If the paper was truly leaked, then the exam wasn't measuring who had studied the hardest anymore. It was measuring who had the right connections. And NEET wasn't alone. Around the same time, thousands of students taking board exams under India's Central Board of Secondary Education, known as CBSE, ran into a completely different problem. Their exam answer sheets were graded digitally, through a process called on-screen marking. But when results came back, they were full of errors, delays, and confusion. Students who had studied for years were left staring at scores that didn't seem to reflect their actual answers, with almost no clear way to appeal or get help. 2 separate failures, in 2 completely different exam systems. But they produced one shared feeling among millions of young Indians: the very system meant to judge merit fairly was not being fair at all. Now, here's where the story takes an unusual turn. In May 2026, a communication strategist named Abhijit Dip, based in the United States.
Actually, I grew up in Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar from Maharashtra, and I grew up in a Dalit family. I'm a Dalit myself. So if you would have asked me, in my childhood, did I ever think that?
Created something called the Cockroach Janta Party, CJP, for short. It began purely as internet satire. A mock political party, using dark humor to mock India's political establishment. The name itself was a deliberate jab. Cockroaches, after all, are famous for surviving absolutely anything you throw at them. But satire has a strange way of tapping into real anger, especially when that anger is already simmering beneath the surface. As the NEET and CBSE controversies grew louder across Indian social media, the joke stopped being just a joke. Dip flew from the United States to India and launched CJP's very first physical protest. And this time, the movement wasn't alone. Established student organizations, groups with decades of history in Indian campus politics, like the Students' Federation of India and the All India Students Association, began joining in. What had started as internet satire now had real organizational experience and manpower behind it. On June 6, 2026, they set up camp at one of India's most symbolic protest grounds, Jantar Mantar, in the heart of New Delhi, a site that has hosted Indian protest movements for generations. Their demand was simple to state, but enormous in its weight. They wanted the resignation of India's Union Education Minister, Dharmendra Pradhan. And as the protest grew louder, the calls reached even higher, all the way to Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself. Beyond resignations, the protesters wanted something far more structural, a complete overhaul of how India conducts its highest-stakes exams, so that a single leak or a single grading failure could never again threaten millions of futures at once. For the first few weeks, the protest simmered quietly. It was present, covered occasionally in the news, but not yet a story that had captured the nation's full attention. That changed because of one man, Sonam Wangchuk. Wangchuk is not your typical student activist. He's an educator and innovator from Ladakh, in the far north of India, known for decades of work reforming education in some of the country's most remote and difficult regions. He's also, notably, one of the real-life inspirations behind a beloved character in a famous Bollywood film about rethinking how India teaches its children, which meant that, for many Indians, his name already carried a certain moral weight. On June 28, Wangchuck sat down at Jantar Mantar and began an indefinite hunger strike. No food. No fixed end date. Just a public, physical stand in support of the students' demands. For 3 straight weeks, Wangchuck remained there, growing visibly weaker by the day, his deteriorating condition slowly becoming a story in itself. His hunger strike gave the movement something a hashtag or a slogan could never provide: a human face, a real body, a visible and mounting cost. People across India who had never even heard of the Cockroach Party began watching, day after day, what was happening to this one elderly man sitting in a tent in the middle of Delhi. By July 18, Wangchuck's condition had grown severe enough that authorities physically removed him from the protest site and took him to a hospital, reportedly against his own wishes. For many watching, this wasn't simply a medical intervention carried out for his safety. It looked, to them, like the state stepping in to silence a symbol before that symbol could grow any more powerful. But here's the thing about movements built on a sense of injustice: removing the symbol doesn't remove the anger underneath it. If anything, Wangchuck's forced removal didn't end the protest. It ignited it further. Over the following weekend, the crowds at Jantar Mantar swelled dramatically. What had been a committed but relatively small group of a few thousand students became something far larger, a call for tens of thousands of people to march directly toward the Indian Parliament, demanding accountability from the very top of the government. On July 21, police moved to stop that march before it could reach Parliament. They deployed tear gas. They used batons. And within hours, video of the confrontation spread rapidly across Indian social media, footage showing young protesters, some visibly crying, pleading with officers not to strike them, while others stood their ground and absorbed the blows anyway, refusing to move. According to Delhi police, close to 180 people were injured in the clash, a mix of security personnel and protesters caught in the chaos. It became one of the most intense confrontations between Indian authorities and a youth-led movement in recent memory. But instead of retreating, the protesters stayed. The very next morning, supporters gathered again at their camp in Jantar Mantar, refusing to leave the site. One 20-year-old student present at the protest put the moment into words that captured the mood of thousands. If the government believed this kind of pressure would make her generation back down, she said, that simply wasn't going to happen. What had started as satire about exam corruption had, in the span of just a few weeks, transformed into something else entirely: a generational confrontation between young Indians and the very institutions meant to govern and protect them. It's worth pausing here and asking a bigger question. Why did an exam scandal escalate into something this large, this fast? The honest answer isn't really about one leaked question paper or one flawed grading system. It's about trust. In any democracy, young people are raised to believe that if they work hard, follow the rules, and compete fairly, the system will eventually reward them for it. NEET and CBSE were supposed to be two of the fairest, most purely merit-based processes in Indian public life, exams that, in theory, don't care who your parents are, how much money your family has, or which city you were born in. When those systems appeared to break down, when the paper may have been leaked, when the marking seemed broken beyond repair, it didn't just cost individual students a few points on a test. It challenged an entire generation's belief that the system was ever built to be fair to them in the first place. That is why a satirical political party with an insect for a mascot could suddenly command the attention of an entire nation. That is why one elderly education reformer's hunger strike could dominate headlines for weeks. And that is why footage of police batons meeting unarmed students could spark outrage that spread far beyond India's own borders, into international news coverage most Indian student protests rarely receive. As of this recording, the protests remain unresolved. Some demands have been partially addressed by officials, others stand exactly where they started, weeks ago. The Cockroach Janta Party has vowed to continue its campaign, even after the crackdown, insisting that this movement is no longer just about exams anymore. It has become, in their words, about whether a government is willing to genuinely listen to its youngest citizens, or whether it will simply wait them out. Whatever happens next, the events at Jantar Mantar carry a lesson that stretches well beyond India's borders. Institutions that decide the fate of millions of young people, through a single test, a single grading algorithm, a single administrative decision, carry an enormous and often underestimated responsibility. When that responsibility is mishandled, even quietly, even briefly, the response that follows can be anything but quiet. A joke about a cockroach became a movement. Not because the joke itself was particularly clever, but because underneath it sat a very real, very old question: One that students everywhere eventually ask of the systems built to judge them: is this actually fair? And when the honest answer starts to feel like no, history shows us again and again that people will eventually stop laughing and start marching instead.